I'm Chef Sarah Glover, and I have a very special series for you guys. I thought I would teach you a few different ways that you can cook steak. You see me cook a lot of really big events, and I've always had a lot of inquiries on, you know, how long do you cook it for? How do you know it's done? Well, today I'm going to teach you how to cook a tomahawk over these coals behind me, and we're going to be hanging it. So we're gonna cook 5 tomahawks over the fire, and I'm really excited. One thing that I really love about cooking whole cuts of meat is that they have the bone in, and the bone in is a really important factor because you've got all this lovely marrow in the bone, and it bastes it in so much beautiful flavor. So I love cooking tomahawks. It is a premium cut of meat, so you've got a really high quality grade of beef that you're cooking, which means you really want to cook it medium rare. And the beautiful thing about cooking over open fire and using residual heat is that essentially you're smoking the meat primarily. So the way I like to hang up my tomahawks, now these are individual tommies. You can also do like a whole rack together, so more of like a roast style. But what we're going to do is we're going to hang it up using some wire. You can also use butcher's twine, but I prefer using wire, particularly when I'm cooking residual heat and I'm like moving my meat around. And the reason being is that we don't want it to burn and fall into the fire, because that would be defeat the purpose of why we're cooking it this way. And yes, it has happened to me before. So we're just going to get our wire and we're just going to tie it off nice and tight. You want to make sure you're getting it really tight. The reason being is that as the meat starts to cook down, now this meat's going to be hanging for probably like 1 to 2 hours. It's going to start to evaporate the water that's in the meat, and it's going to shrink, and so we don't want it to fall off the bone. So I want it nice and long so I can move this bit of meat up and down on the fire behind me. And the beautiful thing that you really want to be looking for with your tomahawks when you go to your local butcher is that it's got this beautiful marbling in it. This is an amazing cut of meat that actually is from where I'm from in Tasmania. So this is by Cape Grim. It's got beautiful marbling in it. It is a grass-fed beef, so it's not been finished on any grain of any sort. It's purely been eating grass, so it tends to have like a really lovely rich minerally flavor to it. So we're gonna hang it up. This wire is just picture hanging wire that I got from the local hardware store. There's nothing terribly special about it other than it's not gonna break when you cook it over the fire. We really want to make sure that we're seasoning our steak really, really well. So don't be scared to be liberal with your salt. And the other thing is you want to make sure that you're using like a good quality sea salt with your meat. You don't want to go and buy this incredible quality premium grade meat and use like a crappy salt from the store. So try and find like a natural sea salt flake. Okay, so I've got my meat. It's really important that your meat is at room temperature. That way it's not gonna like seize up as soon as it hits the fire. It's already mellowed out. It's like, it's ready to be put onto the fire. It's not gonna, it's just gonna like enable the meat to for all that fat that's in it to really start to render down. And essentially that's what I'm wanting when I'm cooking it over this open fire, is I'm wanting to render the fat that's in this meat naturally down, because fat means flavor. So do not be afraid of a bit of fat, my friends. And I always ask my, you know, my local butchers to not to cut off all that extra fat and things like that. Like, I want that on there. I don't want them to cut it off, because naturally when it's cooking over the fire, it's going to break down anyway. And because we're doing it low and slow, and that's a real point of difference when you're cooking your meat low and slow versus a reverse sear, is that it has time for all this fat and the marrow in the bone to flavor our meat, versus a quick reverse sear. You're not going to get that time that the meat needs. And so I'm going to hang my steaks over my fire. And what I'm actually going to do is I have a pot of butter here, what we're doing is we're basting it in some ghee. So that's just some butter that I have been melting down in this pot. Like the milk solids have fallen to the bottom of the pan, and I'm just basically basting it in more pure fat. And that's gonna be flavor and moisture into our steaks as they cook. So if you're wondering how I like control the heat on my steaks, I actually use these little S hooks to do that. And the way I can do that is just by adding chains in or out of the meat. So I can use this and add them to drop and make it lower, but that's already quite hot. I've had this fire going for quite a few hours now, and I'm actually wanting to break the fire up. And the reason I'm doing that is I want to give this like a nice even heat underneath my steaks. And I'm using this radiant heat and the smoke to slowly cook my steaks down. And that's like really hot. Like I can put my hand in there and it feels like I'm like reverse searing myself right now. So these steaks, I really want to try and give them a good 2 hours over the coals. So that's why we need to just monitor that, the temperature of how far it is above the fire. And another thing to just be mindful of is the wind. The wind's actually completely dried out right now. So you can tell by where the smoke's going. It's just going straight up into our steaks. So that is perfect. That is so amazing. It's exactly what I want. So I'm just gonna let them hang out for a while, for about an hour. And now I'm gonna show you guys how to make a whipped mushroom butter that we are gonna serve with our Tommy steaks. These are our mushrooms. So these guys have been smoking by the fire probably for an hour. They've just cooked and then I just moved them to the side. So all I was trying to do is like get some of that smoky flavor in there, cook the mushrooms down a little bit. You do want them cold, or like cool anyway, when you go to add them into your butter, obviously, so it doesn't melt your butter down. All right, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna give my mushrooms like a rough dice, or like a rough chop. Just gonna break them down. Just in kind of like little tiny bite-sized pieces. Balloon whisk on your KitchenAid. And I've got some butter here. This one is salted, and you want to use a good quality butter, like a Kerrygold butter. Here in the US, it's one thing I've noticed is your butter tends to be almost white in color, which is just a sign of it not being grass-fed. So we want to make sure we're getting a good quality grass-fed butter, and you're going to pay for that, and it's going to be worth it because you've just spent all that time making these steaks, and you want to make sure that you put a dang good sauce on that. So 2 heaps of butter, and you're just going to get it aerated. So we're just going to basically re-whip it and get some air happening in my butter to make it light and fluffy, which is going to help it. Gosh, this thing's flying everywhere. I think the KitchenAid's broken. I think it's missing a few things. I'm just gonna add my mushroom. Alright, let's go a little lower. Okay, we really want to macerate the mushrooms into the butter, and I'm gonna have to get a little scrapey thing to scrape this thing down. We're gonna stop it. Oh, yeah. Cool. We might need to invest in a new balloon whisk for the center here. I know, I'm cooking in a bus, guys. It's pretty cool. And we're gonna pop that back down again. This is, I think we're gonna break this. Let's try. So the idea is that you wanted to get your butter nice and light and fluffy, and you want to macerate your mushrooms into your butter, and you really want your butter to start to turn like a slight brown tone. But this is looking good. I'm still really happy with how this has come out. You can see you could even make this ahead of time and just allow the flavor of the mushroom to really seep into your butter more. This is going to taste so good melted over the top of our steaks. Mushroom butter, guys. So now I'm just going to add in some little pieces of wood in and around my steak, and what's going to happen is it's actually going to keep catching on light and smolder and just keep that residual fire going. You don't want like a high liquoring flame or anything, because that's going to burn our beef, and that is not what we want to do. We literally want to smoke this meat out, get as much of that flavor in there as we possibly can. Yeah, so right now I'm like being able to put my hand there and I feel like I'm literally frying myself. So this is a good amount of temperature, great amount of coals. It's got that beautiful gray color on it. It's fantastic. I'm gonna add just a couple more. Dun dun dun, dun dun dun, dun dun dun. The moment has come to slice up the tomahawk. But seriously, guys, we should see what this looks like on the inside. This thing has been smoking for like 3 hours now, and I have swung it around once. The reason being is I really wanted to get that bone, some caramelization on it, get a little bit of heat in it, get a little bit of action. It's looking good. What we're gonna do is I'm gonna cut it off the bone, and I'm gonna slice it up going against the grain, and I'm gonna serve it with some of my mushroom butter. Moment of truth. Did she cook it properly? Dun dun dun. I feel like I need a bigger knife. Dun dun dun. That's better. Now, you're probably thinking, wait a second, Sarah, you didn't rest the meat. It really didn't need to be rested because it's just been hanging out there, and I've literally let the fire drop down to like barely any temperature on it. So I can touch this and it's like cool to touch. I'm not having to raise my fingers off it. That's where I just know that it's good to go. And that is like beautiful, cooked so perfectly. You'll notice when you cook cuts of meat like this over the fire for long periods of time, they'll tend to be really red in coloring, and that's just all the smoke that's gone into the meat itself. It won't have, it will have more of like a smoke ring around it, and it will tend to be like a little brighter in color. And like I said, I love to slice my meat up for people to eat because you're going to make sure that you're cutting the meat the right way. And I just think it's like easier for people to be able to pick up bits and try it on its own rather than having to get like a knife and fork into it awkwardly. So we're always going to season it a little bit. Be mindful that we're going to add some butter onto this. So I'm going to pop this onto my plate and just fan it out like so. And then I always pop my bone on there. I am gonna snip off that bit of wire. Okay, so looking fantastic. Gonna add a dollop of my mushroom butter on here. And you just wanna give that a little bit of time for that mushroom butter to melt into our tomahawk here. And I don't think it's gonna need too much more seasoning. We're just gonna add a little bit on there for good measure. I'm gonna have to wait so you go. We'll come back in a minute. All right, guys, I have a little bit of meat to get through. You know, but more looks effective in my opinion. So I'm gonna make some friends and see if I can find some people to help me eat this, but we should definitely try it together. I mean, I'm a fan. I am such a fan of this way of cooking meat. It is my favorite. A good tummy over the fire with mushroom butter doesn't get much better, honestly. Make sure you give this a try and leave me a comment below. Let me know how it turned out. Let me know maybe even things that you want me to teach you a little bit more about. I'd love to hear from you guys. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit the bell so you know when I'm dropping a next recipe. Give me a love heart. I'd love to hear from you guys, and happy cooking.